I think of Shakespeare like exercise.
In how do you mean?
Well, you know with exercise, how it's always really hard to start, but once you start, it's not necessarily that bad.
And then you're glad that you're doing it, and then you're glad you've done it?
Usually.
I hear ya.
Kia ora, hello, and welcome to this episode of Play Notes Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Duncan.
And I'm also your host, Alison Horsley.
And we're both dramaturgs, meaning we read a lot of plays.
We've likely read the plays you feel you should have, but didn't.
And that's where Play Notes comes in. And today, we're starting a block of 3 problematic Shakespeare plays.
That are Italian. Why are they problematic, Emily?
We've identified that all of them have problematic themes and issues within them to a degree, and I think both of us question to a degree whether they
Why
still
the
need
fuck
to be
we
staged.
chose them?
Yeah. But they still do get staged.
They do indeed.
And disclaimer, this is our opinion. We're not shaming people, telling people they shouldn't stage them necessarily.
But there's a lot to think about if you do stage them, and we're here to help you think about those things.
And they're 3 plays that you very likely will have heard of.
Yep.
So it's good to have some sort of background to them.
Yeah.
So our very first play is
Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
Supposedly the greatest love story ever told.
Yeah? Jury's still out on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so Romeo and Juliet. We've all heard of it. Yeah. We've all heard of it. We probably read it in high school. Emily Duncan, do you want to start us out with the beginning of the play?
I was going to read the prologue because it essentially summarizes the whole play.
Okay, shoot.
And before I start, though, I should say the prologue is delivered by the chorus, and we met the chorus.
I've heard of a chorus before.
Yeah, you did.
When did I hear of those last?
When we talked about the Greek tragedies.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so this is someone talking directly to the audience, and they're going to be talking in the form of a sonnet, a Shakespearean sonnet.
Ooh, and then we'll talk about what that is afterward, but you want to hit us with some acting training?
I'm going to try. Yeah.
Okay.
2 households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these 2 foes a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love, and the continuance of their parents' rage, which, but their children's end, naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage, the which, if you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend.
But what happens in the play, Emily? And how long will it take?
2 hours.
Oh, okay.
Supposedly, if you deliver it at a clip.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so
you'd be more practiced than I was reading that.
That's okay, you were wonderful. So the prologue of Romeo and Juliet is what's known as a Shakespearean sonnet, which means that it has a rhyme scheme of A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, G G. So hard on that last couplet.
Yeah, the rhyming couplet. You may have heard that term before.
Yeah, and the language in the rest of the play is mostly rhyme and also some prose. Or it's mostly blank verse or iambic pentameter that sometimes rhymes, sometimes doesn't, and then also prose.
The part I just read there, that is an example of iambic pentameter, which essentially means 5 da-doms, right?
Okay, hit us with
da-dom, 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 da-dom.
Great, and that is also known as 10 syllables.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, good. Yeah. It's 5 iams, 5 da-doms.
Okay, 5, okay.
Which has a similar rhythm to a heartbeat.
Oh, yeah. So what's the difference between the characters who speak in the da-dums and the characters who do not speak in the da-dums?
Well, there isn't a hard and fast rule. So the da-dums, the iambic pentameter, that's what most of the plays are written as. But occasionally you'll come across characters speaking in prose.
And now might be a good way to segue into the characters.
Yeah, the characters.
Who populate the 2 hours traffic on our stage. Do you like that?
Yeah. Okay. So, with the two main groups we need to know about, there's the Montague family, of whom Romeo is a member.
Yep.
I'm talking slowly because I'm expecting myself to trip up and get it wrong.
You're doing great. Okay, I'm looking right at you.
So Romeo Montague and his friends, and amongst his team, he's got Mercutio. Yeah.
Yep.
Who else has he got on his side, Alison?
He has his parents on his side.
Of course, Lord and Lady Montague.
He's got Benvolio on his side.
Good friend. So they're the main players on that
side. They're his kinsmen / friends.
Yeah.
And then he's also pretty tight with Friar Lawrence as well.
Yes, well, the Friar Lawrence also
goes both
between
ways.
The two. He goes both ways. You know, he'll do a job for you if you need him. Yeah.
He can get poison. Yeah. He can marry you. Yeah. Anyway.
And then the other family are the Capulets.
Yes.
So that's Juliet's family, her parents, Lord and Lady Capulet. There's Juliet. There's also Tybalt, who's her cousin.
Yeah, he's got some fiery temperament to him.
Yeah, and there's the guy Paris, who she's betrothed to. She's meant to marry.
Yeah, and he's related to the Duke of Verona, so he's got some connections.
Yeah, and she has a nurse.
Yeah,
who's not like a nurse you'd have in a hospital. It's more like a nanny but they stay with you a lot longer.
Yeah. So maybe start as a wet nurse, maybe.
Yeah.
Not going to get into that, but...
Yes, and she talks about that.
Yes, she does.
And for people who don't know what a wet nurse is, there was a time and place where highborn women did not breastfeed their own children, and so a wet nurse would take care of that business. I don't think there's any suggestion in the play that Juliet is still receiving those services.
Just emotionally.
Yeah, but the nurse just brings it up.
Yeah, she does. She likes to hold that over. Yeah, so the nurse is pretty invested in Juliet. Okay, so we have Team Montague, and then we have Team Capulet. Now,
and they really hate each other.
They hate each other big time, generations and generations of hate. So they hate each other so much that they actually start the play in a street fight where Montagues and Capulets are fighting each other.
Yeah, the so-called greatest love story of all time.
Street fight.
Yeah.
Starts with a big fight.
Yeah, and the Duke has to come in and...
Yeah, the Duke has to come in and be like, I'm gonna kill any... y'all have to stop the fighting. Please keep the peace. If I find you fighting again, I will put you to death, whoever's doing the fighting. So that's what kind of starts the whole thing.
Should we mention briefly how Romeo and Juliet meet? Because they don't know each other at the start of the play.
Correct.
Juliet doesn't get out much.
No, she doesn't. Her family's pretty strict, and also she's 13. So, not super common for the 13-year-old girls of Verona to be cruising the streets by themselves. Unlike, it apparently is quite common for roving bands of boys in their teens to be roving the streets together, as is evidenced with Romeo and Benvolio.
Romeo's been doing quite a bit of roving.
Yeah. There's been a young lady who's caught his eye, actually. And so, he's like rolling with his guys. And they end up conniving their way into a party being thrown by Juliet's father, Lord Capulet. So they get into the hottest party of the year. Fortunately, it's masked. So they're wearing masks. They get into the party, and that's when Romeo and Juliet meet. And pretty soon, they know who each other are.
Yeah, they clock each other.
Yeah, they clock each other. They're like, you're hot, I'm hot, let's be hot together. Oh, wait.
But we're also meant to hate each other.
Yeah, and that's hot.
Yes.
Right, because we're teenagers.
Yeah, and 2 minutes ago, Romeo was hot for this other
Rosalind.
chick.
Yeah,
Rosalind chick.
Or Rosaline.
And now he's with Juliet. And this has always been one of my issues with the character of Romeo.
And what is it?
It's quite fickle.
He's like 16.
If the play doesn't end as it does,
right?
They both die. We're allowed to say the play notes.
Yeah.
That he wouldn't have found someone else.
No, that's true. Juliet, possibly less like... Well, I mean, technically, by the end of the play, she is engaged to marry Paris because her father is like... I have a great idea. You're going to marry County Paris. And so she's engaged to Paris, but she carries on this illicit romance with Romeo, who, spoiler, he kills Juliet's cousin in a street fight because he's avenging the death of his cousin in a slightly prior street fight, and he gets banished, all that stuff. While he's banished, Juliet's parents are planning for her wedding to Paris. So anyway, so just a side note. So I guess she would have found somebody else because Capulet would have married her off, but Romeo might have moved on.
Yeah. There are very few stage directions in Shakespeare.
Right.
And when we talk in the next episode more about the theatre, we'll understand a bit more why. But the language, what the characters say, is very descriptive. You might have heard people say everything you need to know in Shakespeare is in the text or in the words.
Yeah, I mean, even like we even know when they kiss at the party. Romeo and Juliet kiss at the party, and we know they kiss because she says, "You kiss by the book." So it's said right there. So you don't need someone in the stage directions to have said, "And they kiss now." Though often later editors would go in and do that just to make it a bit easier. But the plays were written to be performed. Who normally speaks in prose in Romeo and Juliet?
Well, I mean, I think in general, prose, to my mind, is often spoken more like lower status characters.
Yeah,
Although
like the nurse in Romeo and Juliet speaks in a lot of prose.
Often servants and clowns speak in prose.
Or people when they're showing a lot of emotional closeness. So when characters are really good friends, sometimes they'll revert to prose. But otherwise in Romeo and Juliet, most of the love is talked about in like rhyming couplets and iambic pentameter. When Romeo and Juliet first meet, they actually like complete a sonnet together. It's so cute. And
they finish each other's sentences.
They do. But one thing that we probably should mention is that Shakespeare did not come up with this story.
Yes,
he's not the first one.
of his parallels with the Greek tragedies.
Yeah.
These are not original stories.
Right.
But it's his spin on it.
Yeah, so even though... So we think Romeo and Juliet was written somewhere between 1591 and 1595. Most people put it around 1595. But this was a story that would have been floating around a little bit. So most of these stories would have come from Italian sources. So this was known as the history of Romeo and Juliet that would have been translated into English in the 1560s that Shakespeare would have gotten. And that's kind of the case with all of his plays, or at least a whole bunch of them. So... But
there's not about the what, but the how.
Yeah, it's the how. And in the case of Shakespeare, the how is his character development, his iambic pentameter, the beautiful language. And he was an actor, and so he was able to bring a life through the language and bring characters to life through language like no other playwright at the time, and arguably since really could, because he was acting and writing at the same time.
People still adapt the play in various forms. So West Side Story is a version of Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Was there a claymation or an animated film called Romeo and Juliet?
Oh, hell yeah, Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
If you want to see a film version of Romeo and Juliet, the Franco Zeffirelli version is sort of a bit of a classic.
Yeah.
Though... that's back from 1968.
I mean, obviously, the Baz Luhrmann one is also a classic.
Of course. Yeah.
Though I did read
very
somewhere...
stylized.
Yeah. I read somewhere that might have been inspired by a Kiwi production. I read somewhere. Yeah, that had been up in Auckland at one point. So, not sure on that. So, Emily, you've taught teenagers before.
Yeah.
You've taught this play. What are your feelings on this?
I would be reluctant to teach it now, mainly because of things of youth suicide.
Okay.
And how it's can be quite graphically shown on stage.
And graphically, because we have Juliet dies. Well, first it seems like she has died of natural causes because she's taken a potion given to her by the friar that makes her look
These
dead.
are not risk-adverse young people.
No,
Which our age
they're
group
they're
isn't,
like yeah. But she actually stabs herself to death, and Romeo takes poison.
The remainder of the poison.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, any play, you know, that addresses issues such as this, they can have value in terms of how we discuss these issues. But just me personally, it sits uneasily because of the how, really.
And the fact that they both die on stage, that we see them die, and we see them romanticize dying for love.
Yes.
For, like, young, idealized, romantic love.
And as I was saying to you before we were doing this episode, you know, and we mentioned Romeo. He's such a fickle character as well.
Yeah, he's a teenager.
The story takes place over such a short amount of time. And I also get they're kind of victims of their families as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. They pay such a heavy price.
They do, and it's funny to think of them as star-crossed lovers, because, like, the word lover and a 13-year-old girl are two things that do not sit side by side comfortably for me, or even in the same, like, paragraph.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a little bit uneasy, but it's known as the greatest love story of all time.
Although on that note, Alison Horsley, we should say that you know, you mentioned earlier about the treatment of Juliet.
Yeah.
You know, she is a 13-year-old girl. We have to remember the context within which it was written. But so it's really hard to empathise with her parents.
Yeah, it is. They are very, very strict. Capulet in particular, whenever she tries to talk back and essentially take control over her future, Capulet pretty much lays a smackdown. And in some productions gets physical with her as well. And she essentially has to bend to his will and literally bow to him and say that she will follow his will. So I think for a kid like this, I think we also get into some issues because she feels that the only way out of the situation, rather than disappointing her parents and saying, no, I don't want to marry Paris, I'm in love with Romeo, the best way she can get out of this is to procure a potion that's going to make her look dead.
It's so high stakes.
Yeah, it's so high stakes.
And it goes horribly wrong.
Yeah, and then, presumably...
Is that a spider?
That is a great big spider. It's a spider! There's a spider in the studio, everybody. It's okay. At least I know I'm not going crazy. Or it's not the ghost of Shakespeare coming after me to be like, but it is the greatest love story.
Maybe it's a Romeo and Juliet fan.
Maybe it is. Anyway.
Okay.
Arachnophobia aside.
Yeah.
That for Juliet, this is the only option is like to kill herself. And that's
And then
that's a
Friar
tragedy.
Lawrence sort of enables her in that.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then, like, meanwhile, the nurse is kind of living vicariously through Juliet's love story with Romeo. And, you know, that just pisses me off to no end. But it's a great character to play, right? It's a wonderful opportunity for an actor. But it's a problematic character, you know, in that way. It's a woman who's doing her best, but, you know, she and the friar aren't making the best adult decisions in the world.
So on that note, because also we want to catch the spider.
Yes, we do.
But we should quickly say what are our favourite parts to it. For me, I think Friar Lawrence just gets really great lines. So you should read the play for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think despite the fact that sometimes she makes me angry, the nurse has really good lines, and she uses terms like scurvy knave and skeins mates and ropery, which is just fabulous.